"Get this woman out of my son's church." Victoria Harrison's voice cut through the wedding like a blade. Then she did something no one expected. She grabbed my arm in front of 300 guests and physically pulled me toward the door. My bouquet hit the marble floor. Roses scattered everywhere. "You are nothing," she hissed close enough that I could smell her perfume. "You have always been nothing, and I will burn this wedding to the ground before I let my son make the worst mistake of his life." She thought she had already won. She had no idea who was sitting in those black cars pulling up outside. If this story moves you, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this goes. Emily Carter had learned over the course of 2 years exactly how to stand still when she was being humiliated. It was not a skill anyone should have to develop. It was not something she was proud of. But she had learned it the way you learn to walk again, after a broken leg, out of necessity, out of sheer will, out of the stubborn belief that if she could just get through this moment, the next one might be better. She stood at the back of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church on a cold Saturday morning in November, her fingers laced together in front of her, her chin level, her breathing controlled. The bouquet of cream-colored roses in her hands had begun to tremble slightly, but only because her hands were cold. That was what she told herself. It was only the cold. The church was beautiful. She had spent weeks thinking about this church, dreaming about it. The high-arched ceilings, the pale winter light coming through the stained glass windows, the long aisle with its white satin runner. She had walked that aisle in her mind 1,000 times with Ethan, waiting at the end, smiling at her the way he always smiled when she walked into a room like she was something worth smiling about. She had not imagined this. She had not imagined his mother standing at the front of the church, surrounded by 300 guests, speaking in a voice designed to carry. "I want everyone here to understand." Victoria Harrison said, her back straight and her pearls gleaming under the chandelier light, "that we did everything we could to give Ethan the opportunity to reconsider. A mother does what she must, and I will not stand at this altar and pretend to celebrate a mistake." Emily heard someone gasp. She heard the rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats. She heard somewhere toward the back a child whisper something to its mother, and the mother shush it urgently. She did not move. Victoria turned then, and her eyes found Emily across the length of the church. There was no anger in them. That was the part that cut deepest. There was no anger, no passion, nothing that might have suggested she felt anything at all. There was only the flat, measured look of a woman who had already decided the outcome of a situation and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "My son deserves a woman of substance," Victoria said. "A woman with standing. A woman who can walk into any room in this city and belong there." She paused. "You, my dear, are a librarian from Ohio." "Illinois," Emily said quietly. The church went very still. Victoria blinked. It was the only indication that she had not expected Emily to speak. "I'm from Illinois," Emily said. "Not Ohio. I've lived in Chicago for 7 years. I volunteer at the Literacy Center on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I run the children's reading program at the branch on South Michigan every Saturday morning. I know this city better than most of the people sitting in this room." She paused. "But I understand that those things don't matter to you." Victoria's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "No," she said. "They don't." And then she turned to her husband, to her daughter, to the assembled collection of Chicago's oldest money and most closely guarded social contracts, and she said, "We're leaving." She walked up the aisle slowly. She did not rush. She was making a point. Her husband followed. Her daughter followed. And then, like a tide going out, the Harrison family and their closest friends and their business associates and their board members and their wives and their husbands and their adult children began to file out of the pews. It took 4 minutes. Emily counted. Minutes. Emily. She stood there for 4 minutes and watched 3/4 of the guest list walk past her without making eye contact, and she counted every second, because if she stopped counting, she would start feeling, and if she started feeling, she would not be able to stand still. And she had learned over the course of 2 years exactly how to stand still. When it was over, when the heavy wooden doors had swung shut and the sound of heels on marble had faded, Emily looked down at her bouquet. One of the cream roses had lost a petal. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find her maid of honor. her friend and colleague Joanna, who had both hands pressed to her mouth and tears running freely down her cheeks. "Emily," Joanna said. It was the only thing she said. There was nothing else to say. Emily looked at her. Then she looked at the remaining guests, maybe 80 people, friends from the library, a few neighbors, some of Ethan's colleagues, who had quietly stayed behind their faces tight with something between sympathy and discomfort. Then she looked at the altar. Ethan was still there. He had not moved during any of it. He had stood at the front of the church with the pastor beside him and watched his entire family walk out, and he had not moved. His face was unreadable in the way that a man's face goes unreadable when he is holding himself together with both hands and cannot afford to let go of either one. He looked at Emily. She looked at him. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice carried perfectly in the empty church. She almost laughed. She almost, God help her, laughed out loud in the middle of what remained of her wedding. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He nodded. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was going to... I thought I had. I'm sorry." "You didn't do this. She's my mother." "You didn't do this, Ethan." He crossed the church in long strides and took her hands in his, and she felt the bouquet being carefully moved aside and his warm palms closing over her cold fingers. And she thought, this is real. Whatever else has just happened, this is real. He is real. "We can still do this," he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "If you still want to, we can still get married right now today with whoever's left, and it doesn't have to mean anything about us." She looked into his face. She had looked into this face hundreds of times in the last 2 years across dinner tables and library counters and emergency room waiting rooms and Saturday morning farmers markets. And she knew this face. She trusted this face. She took a breath. And then the doors of the church opened. Not from the inside, from the outside, both of them simultaneously swinging inward with a heavy, deliberate weight that sent a gust of November air rolling down the length of the church. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood 3 men in dark suits. Behind them, barely visible from where Emily stood, was the gleam of black cars. Multiple cars. More than the venue parking lot had seemed capable of holding. The kind of cars that came with flags on the hood. One of the 3 men in dark suits stepped forward. "Is there an Emily Carter present?" he asked. His accent was British, not the soft-edged British of films or television, the precise, formal, weight-bearing British of official occasions. Emily did not breathe. "Yes," Joanna said, pointing helplessly at Emily before anyone could stop her. The man looked at Emily. Then he brought his hands together in front of him and stood a little straighter, which should not have been physically possible, because he was already standing so straight, Emily thought his spine might be made of iron. "His Majesty requests your presence," the man said. "He is waiting outside." No one in the church made a sound. Emily felt Ethan's hands tighten around hers. She looked at him. His face had changed. Something had shifted behind his eyes, something she couldn't read and had never seen there before. "Emily," he said, quietly, "only for her. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that I knew. I've known for a long time, and it never changed anything for me, not one thing." She went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the November air. "What," she said carefully, "do you know?" He looked at her, and in his face she saw the thing she had been terrified of for 7 years. Discovery, exposure, the world she had run from, coming to find her where she had tried so hard to hide. But she also saw something else. She saw that he was not afraid, and she saw that he was not leaving. "I know who you are," he said. "I have for almost 3 years, and I chose you every day knowing exactly who you were." He squeezed her hands. "So whatever's about to happen out there, I'm right here, right next to you. You don't have to go through it alone." She stared at him. 7 years of silence. 7 years of carefully constructed anonymity. 7 years of early mornings at the library and late evenings at the literacy center, and Saturday programs for children who were learning to love stories. 7 years of rebuilding something inside herself that she had believed was beyond repair. 7 years of being Emily Carter from Chicago, who grew her own basil on her windowsill and could never remember where she put her reading glasses and cried at the sad parts of children's books when she thought no one was watching. 7 years of being nobody. Nobody had found her anyway. She looked at Ethan one more time, then she looked at the man in the dark suit who was still waiting with the polite, inexhaustible patience of someone trained to wait. "Tell His Majesty," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, "that I'll be right there." She handed her bouquet to Joanna. She smoothed the front of her dress, the simple cream-colored gown she had bought with money, saved from 2 years of a librarian's salary, plain and unadorned, and exactly what she had wanted, because she had learned to want simple things, to be grateful for them, to hold them carefully. Then she walked down the aisle. The remaining guests watched her go. No one spoke. She pushed through the church doors and stepped outside. The November air hit her first cold and sharp, and smelling of Chicago in late autumn, of Lake Michigan, and dry leaves and exhaust and coffee from the cart on the corner where she bought her medium dark roast every Tuesday and Thursday morning before her volunteer shift. Then she saw the cars, 6 black vehicles, royal crests on the doors, flags she recognized with a lurch of her stomach that was like stepping off a curb you didn't see coming. And beside the lead car, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture so familiar, it made her chest crack open like something had split the bone, her father. King Alexander IV looked older than she remembered. There were lines in his face she hadn't put there, or maybe she had. Maybe the last 7 years had put them there just as surely as everything else. His hair had gone fully gray at the temples. He was wearing a dark overcoat, not a uniform, nothing official. Just a coat. Just a father who had driven to a church in Chicago to stand outside in the November cold. He looked at her. She stood on the steps. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the security detail stood at careful distance. Traffic moved on the street. The world continued at its ordinary pace, entirely unaware. "Amelia," her father said. It was the first time she had heard that name in 7 years. It hit her somewhere below the ribs, in a place she had not touched in a long time. She felt it move through her, not like pain, or not only like pain, like something breaking loose that had been frozen too long. "I go by Emily now," she said, but her voice was not steady anymore. Her father nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "I've known for 4 years. I had you found after 3. He paused. "I didn't come before now because you asked me not to, because you needed your space, because I couldn't bear to be the reason you ran further." His voice roughened at the edges. "But what happened in that church today, what that woman said to you, I cannot stand outside and do nothing. I am many things, Amelia. I have been a poor father and a failed king on many occasions, but I am not able to watch someone humiliate my daughter and drive away. Kadiu." Emily stood very still on the steps of the church. Behind her, she could hear the doors people had crept to the entrance to watch. She could feel them there, Joanna and Ethan's colleagues, and the 80 guests who had stayed. She could feel the weight of their presence and their watching. "They already left," she said. "The Harrisons, they left before you arrived." "Yes," her father said. "I know. I passed them in the parking lot." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "Did you speak to them?" she asked. King Alexander IV looked at his daughter with the measured expression of a man who had spent 40 years being photographed, and in the stillness of his face, she saw something she recognized from childhood, the specific contained fury of a parent whose child has been hurt. "Not yet," he said. The words landed like a stone in still water, and Emily felt the ripples move out from them in every direction. Not yet. She looked at her father, who had crossed an ocean and driven to a Chicago church on a November Saturday, and stood outside in the cold because he would not let this be the ending of her story. Not like this, not in a borrowed white dress, on the steps of a place where she had hoped to begin something good. She thought about Victoria Harrison's face, the flatness of it, the certainty. The absolute conviction that Emily was nothing because she had come from nowhere, because she worked a normal job and wore a plain dress and could be dismissed without consequences. She thought about Daniel and the accident, and the morning she had woken up in a hospital bed in London, and known with absolute animal certainty that she could not stay, that if she stayed, she would disappear into the grief and the protocol and the managed public mourning and never find herself again. She thought about the library on South Michigan, the children who came every Saturday, the little girl named Maya who had been terrified of chapter books and had last spring read 32 pages of Charlotte's Web without stopping and burst into tears at the end because she hadn't wanted it to be over. She thought about Ethan, who had held her hands through the doors opening and told her that he'd known for 3 years and it hadn't changed a thing. She took a breath. "Dad?" she said. It was the first time she had used that word in 7 years. It felt strange in her mouth, fragile, like something she was not sure would hold weight, but it held. Her father's composure cracked, just slightly, just at the corners of his eyes. He pressed his lips together and said nothing. "Are you angry with them?" she asked. "Yes," he said immediately. "Are you going back in there?" He looked at the church. "If you want me to." She thought about it. She thought about Victoria Harrison, who had stood in that church and declared her worthless in front of 300 people who had spent 2 years making her feel like an intrusion, like a mistake, like a charity case that Ethan had picked up and would eventually set back down. She thought about what it meant to have stood still all that time. "Yes," Emily said. "I want you to." Her father held out his arm. She looked at it for a moment, at his sleeve, at his hand, at the arm of the father she had not touched in 7 years. Then she took it, and together they turned toward the church doors, and the doors opened. The arm Emily took was not just her father's arm. It was 7 years of silence, 7 years of distance, 7 years of a daughter who had run so far and so fast that even she had stopped believing anyone would come after her. And now here she was, standing on the steps of a church in Chicago, in a plain white dress she had bought with her own money, holding the arm of a king, walking back through the doors of the place where someone had just tried to destroy her. She kept her chin level. She had learned that, at least. The doors opened inward, and the light from the church spilled out around them, and Emily felt, in the 3 seconds before the guests registered what was happening, a strange and complete stillness. Like the moment before a storm breaks, like the held breath of something enormous. Then someone saw the men in dark suits. Then someone saw the crests on the overcoats. Then someone saw the man walking beside Emily, and the whispers started at the back and moved forward like a wave, fast and unstoppable, and by the time Emily and her father reached the midpoint of the aisle, the entire remaining congregation had gone so quiet she could hear the candles burning. Ethan was still at the altar. He had not moved. He stood with his hands folded in front of him, and he watched Emily walk toward him with her father's arm in hers. And his face did something complicated, something that moved through shock and recognition and relief and grief all at the same time in the space of about 4 seconds, and then settled into an expression so steady and so open that Emily felt it like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. "Ethan," she said. "I see him," Ethan said quietly. "We need to talk." "Yes," he said. "We do, but first—" He looked at her father. Then he did something that made 3 of the royal security detail take an involuntary half-step forward. He extended his hand. Not a bow, not a formal gesture, just a hand, the way a man introduces himself to the father of the woman he loves. "I'm Ethan Harrison," he said. "I love your daughter. I know that probably comes second right now to everything else, but I needed to say it to your face." King Alexander IV looked at the hand for a moment. Then he took it. "I know who you are," the king said. His voice was low, measured, the voice of a man who had spent 4 decades saying important things carefully. "I've known for nearly 3 years." Ethan nodded. "Then you know I never used it." "I know," the king said. "It's the reason I'm shaking your hand instead of having you removed." Joanna, standing 6 feet away with Emily's bouquet pressed to her chest, made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She covered her mouth immediately, but it was too late. The sound had broken something in the atmosphere of the church, cracked the unbearable tension just slightly, just enough for people to breathe. Emily looked between the 2 men. Her father holding himself with the particular careful dignity of someone who was fighting hard not to show how much he was feeling. And Ethan, who was not fighting it at all, who had never been any good at hiding what he felt, which was one of the first things she had loved about him. "How long have you known?" she asked Ethan. She needed to hear it from him, Directly, in this church with her father standing beside her with 80 witnesses behind them, Ethan met her eyes. 2 months after we started dating, he said. The church breathed in. You found a photograph, she said. It wasn't a question. She had run the calculations in her head 100 times over the years, knowing someday someone would look closely enough. A newspaper archive, he said. I was doing research for a patient, a British national complicated medical history. I needed background on the family. I went through 10 years of archived coverage, and I found a photo of Princess Amelia Windsor at a state dinner in 2016. And I sat in my office for 40 minutes because I couldn't figure out how to breathe. What did you do after that? I went home, he said. And you were there because you had a key by then, and you were on the couch reading a book, and you were wearing those terrible wool socks with the holes in the heels that you refused to throw away, and you looked up and said, "You look terrible. Sit down. I'll make tea." And I sat down, and you made tea. And I decided... He paused. He pressed his lips together. I decided that whoever you had been, whoever you had chosen to leave behind, that was yours. That wasn't mine to take from you, so I didn't say anything. Emily stared at him. Behind them, nobody moved. You knew for almost 3 years, she said slowly, and you never said a word. Not one. Not even when your mother... She stopped. His jaw tightened. No. And that's something I'll spend a long time making, right, Emily? I want you to know that. I knew who you were, and I watched her treat you the way she did, and I thought I could fix it without... He exhaled hard. I couldn't fix it. I should have tried harder. Ethan. I should have tried harder. Ethan, she said it more firmly. Stop. He stopped. You didn't build me a palace, she said. You didn't call the press. You didn't use it. You sat with me on a Tuesday night when I couldn't sleep, and we talked about nothing until 3 a.m, and you never once made me feel like I owed you the truth. She took a breath. That is worth more to me than you understand. Someone in the back of the church started crying, quietly, but audibly. Emily didn't turn to see who. Her father beside her had not spoken in several minutes. She could feel the tension in his arm. She could feel him holding himself back with the practiced restraint of a man who had spent his life performing control in public while everything underneath ran very deep and very fast. Dad, she said quietly. I'm here, he said. I know. She paused. She called me nobody. His arm went rigid. The woman who just walked out of this church, Emily continued steadily, looked at me in front of 300 people and told me I was nothing, that I had nothing, that I would never be enough for her son. She felt the words in her chest the same way they had hit her the first time, hard and deliberate. She's done it before, not in public like that, but she has said things to me privately. Over 2 years that I will not repeat in this church, because I don't want those words in this building today. And I let her, because I thought that was what you did when you loved someone. You absorbed the damage that came with them. Amelia, her father said. His voice had changed entirely. I don't regret it, she said. I don't regret a single day with Ethan, but I need you to understand what today was, what she did, because you came here and you're about to walk into whatever comes next, and I need you to go in knowing the full picture. The king was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Where is she now? She left, Emily said. When she walked out, she drove away. She doesn't know you're here. Alexander IV turned slightly and looked at the man in the dark suit standing near the door who had been motionless as a post through this entire exchange. Something passed between them, no words, just a look. She will know shortly, the king said simply. Emily felt a chill move up her arms that had nothing to do with temperature. Joanna appeared at Emily's elbow, practically materializing out of nowhere, the way she always did in crisis situations, which was one of the reasons Emily had asked her to be maid of honor in the first place. She pressed the rose bouquet back into Emily's hands. Sorry, Joanna said because she felt she needed to say something. Your Majesty, I'm Joanna. I work at the library. I'm Emily's. I've known her for 5 years, and she is the best person I have ever met. And if I had known any of this, I would have... She stopped. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm talking. Because you're nervous, the king said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice. And because you love my daughter, both of which I appreciate more than you know. Joanna blinked very fast, then she stepped back. Emily looked at the pastor who had been standing at the altar through all of this with the expression of a man who had performed over 300 weddings and had never not once experienced anything remotely like this. "Reverend Matthews," she said. "Yes," he said immediately. "Are you still willing to perform this ceremony?" He straightened up. "Absolutely," he said with a conviction that suggested he had never been more certain of anything in his professional life. Emily nodded. Then she heard the doors open again. Not the front doors. The side door, the one that connected to the parking lot overflow, where the late arrivals always came in. It opened with that particular sound of cold air rushing in, and Emily turned with everyone else, and Victoria Harrison walked back into the church. She had come back. Emily did not know why. Maybe she had forgotten something. Maybe someone had called her. Maybe some instinct had turned her around in the parking lot, the instinct of a woman who was used to being in control of every room she entered and could not quite accept that she had walked out of one permanently. Victoria Harrison stepped through the side door and stopped. She took in the scene in front of her, her son at the altar, the 80 guests who had stayed, Emily in her white dress standing in the middle of the aisle, and the men in dark suits, and the crests, and the flags, and the man standing beside Emily, who Victoria Harrison, who read 3 newspapers a day and had attended 4 state functions and considered herself among the most socially informed women in Chicago, recognized immediately and completely. The color left her face so fast it was physically visible from across the church. "What?" Victoria said. Her voice had lost its carrying quality entirely. It came out small. "What is Mrs. Harrison?" The man in the dark suit near the door spoke. He had a voice designed for exactness. "His Majesty King Alexander IV of the United Kingdom requests that you remain in the building." Victoria's hand went to her pearls. Emily watched her. She watched the moment that Victoria Harrison, who had spent 2 years looking at Emily Carter as though she were furniture, looked at Emily Carter and saw something else entirely. Saw the way Emily stood beside this man. Saw the family resemblance that was obvious once you knew to look for it, the jawline, the eyes, the particular straightness of the spine. "She's," Victoria started. "My daughter," King Alexander said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Yes." The silence in the church had weight. Victoria's husband had come in behind her. He saw his wife's face and he went still in the doorway. Their daughter Claudia, who had trailed in last, looked at the scene, and then looked at her mother, and then looked at Ethan, and then pressed her back against the wall, as though she might be able to disappear into it. Victoria took 1 step forward and then stopped as though she had hit something invisible. "I didn't," she began. "You called her nobody," the king said. Still quiet, still measured, each word placed like something that could not be moved once it was set down. In front of 300 people, on her wedding day, in a house of God. He paused. "I would like you to tell me, Mrs. Harrison, what would possess a person to do that to another human being?" Victoria opened her mouth. "Think carefully," he said, "before you speak." She closed it. Ethan moved. He had been still through all of it, but he moved now, stepping down from the altar platform and walking toward his mother with a deliberateness that Emily had seen before in the hospital when he was about to tell a patient something that was going to change their life. Measured, unavoidable. "Mom," he said when he reached her. Victoria looked at her son with an expression Emily had never seen on her face in 2 years. Something cracked under the surface of it, something that looked stripped of all the pearls and the careful posture and the social architecture, like fear. "I need you to listen to me," Ethan said. "Not as a Harrison, just as your son. Will you do that?" Victoria's chin trembled. Once, she controlled it. "You told me she wasn't good enough," Ethan said. "You told me she came from nothing, that she had no standing, that I was throwing myself away on a woman with no future. You said those things to me, and you said them to her, and you said them today in front of everyone we know." He stopped. "Do you understand that even if she were exactly who you thought she was, a librarian from Illinois with no family money and no title and no connections, that every single thing you said would still have been wrong?" Victoria said nothing. "I'm asking you a direct question," Ethan said. "Do you understand that, yes, Ethan, do you understand that The church waited. Victoria Harrison looked at her son. She looked at Emily. She looked at the King of England, who was watching her with the patient, absolute attention of a man who had all the time in the world and no intention of looking away. "Yes," she said, barely audible, a word that seemed to cost her something measurable. "Good," Ethan said, "because that's what I needed to hear. Not the apology, not the explanation, just that. Just yes." He turned and walked back to the altar. Emily looked at her father one more time. He looked back at her, and in his face she saw the thing she had been afraid she would never see again. Not the king, not the formal posture, not the managed expression for public occasions. Just her father, just the man who had taught her to read in a palace library in London when she was 4 years old, who had carried her on his shoulders at garden parties, who had wept at her mother's funeral and tried so hard to hide it and failed completely. She reached up with her free hand and pressed it over his where it rested on her arm. "Walk me down the aisle," she said. He covered her hand with his. "It would be," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the last word, and he let it. He did not try to manage it. "The greatest honor of my life." And they walked. The 80 people who had stayed watched in complete silence. Joanna was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it, holding the bouquet against her chest. Reverend Matthews had both hands clasped in front of him and was looking at the ceiling briefly, the way a man does when he is privately expressing gratitude to something larger than himself. Ethan watched Emily come toward him. He watched her the way he always watched her walk into a room, like it was worth stopping everything for, like it was the most important thing happening anywhere in the world. She reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Ethan's. He held it for one moment longer than was necessary. Then he stepped back and took his place in the front pew, and he sat very straight and very still, and Emily did not look at him, because if she looked at him, she would not be able to speak. She looked at Ethan instead. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "I have some things to tell you." "I know," he said. "You can tell me all of it. We have the rest of our lives." She felt the truth of that move through her, slow and warm and steadier than anything she had felt in a very long time. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said back. And Reverend Matthews opened his book. Reverend Matthews had performed 312 weddings over the course of his career. He had performed them in thunderstorms and heat waves. He had performed them when the groom fainted and when the flower girl refused to walk and when a fight broke out between two uncles over a parking spot 20 minutes before the ceremony began. He had once performed a wedding while a small fire was being quietly extinguished in the back hallway by two ushers who did not want to alarm the bride. He had never performed one like this. He opened his book and he began, and his voice was steady because 30 years of practice had made it so. And the words of the ceremony filled the church the way they always did, familiar and weight-bearing and old, in a way that made people feel held by them, contained by them, as though the words themselves were walls that kept the chaos of ordinary life from breaking through. Emily heard them. She heard all of them. But she was also aware with every nerve in her body of Victoria Harrison standing near the side door of the church. Not sitting, standing, as though she could not decide whether to stay or go, and her body had compromised by doing neither. Ethan was watching Emily's face. She could feel it. "You're thinking about her," he said quietly during the moment when Reverend Matthews paused to turn a page. "I'm trying not to," Emily said. "Don't," Ethan said. "She doesn't get any more of today, not one more second." Emily looked at him. She took a breath. She nodded once, and she let it go. She did not look at Victoria Harrison again for the rest of the ceremony. The vows came. Reverend Matthews looked at Ethan over his book, and Ethan turned to Emily with his hands around hers, and he said the words he had written himself 3 weeks ago at his kitchen table at 2 a.m, because he could not sleep, and the words had needed somewhere to go. He had not shown them to anyone. He had practiced them alone in his car, driving to the hospital on early morning shifts. "I don't believe," Ethan said, "that love is about finding someone perfect. I think it's about finding someone real. Someone who is still there on the hard days, on the quiet days, on the days when nothing is happening and nothing needs to happen. You were that person for me before I knew anything about you. And you were that person for me after I knew everything. That's what I want to spend the rest of my life saying yes to. Not the title, not the history, just you. just exactly this. Emily had promised herself she would not cry during the vows. She cried during the vows. Joanna behind her produced a travel pack of tissues from somewhere inside her dress in the way that a truly prepared maid of honor always does, and pressed them into Emily's free hand without a word. When it was Emily's turn, she looked at Ethan and she thought about what she wanted to say. She had written things down and crossed them out and rewritten them and crossed them out again for 2 weeks. She had drafts in 3 different notebooks. None of them had felt right. She decided to say the thing that was true. "I ran away from my life 7 years ago," she said. "I had a very good reason and I don't regret it, but I also ran away from the possibility that any of this could happen to me. I ran from the idea that I could be loved by someone who knew the full weight of what they were taking on." She paused. "You knew. You knew for almost 3 years, and you never once made me feel like a burden or a secret or a complication. You just loved me, simply, consistently, every ordinary Tuesday." Her voice broke slightly and she steadied it. "I want to spend the rest of my life being that for you. Showing up. Staying. Every ordinary Tuesday." From the front pew, King Alexander made no sound. But Joanna, who could see his face from where she stood, would later tell Emily that he had pressed one hand flat against his sternum for the duration of the vows, as though he was physically holding something in. Reverend Matthews produced the rings. Ethan had bought Emily's ring 4 months ago. He had gone alone to a small jeweler on North Clark Street, not the Harrison family's jeweler on the Magnificent Mile, not anywhere his mother would have recognized or approved of. He had chosen a simple band with a single stone, modest and clean, and he had paid for it with money from his own account, not the trust fund, not the family account. His own money, money he had earned. He slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She had never told him her ring size. He had measured her finger while she was sleeping 3 months ago, using a piece of string and a ruler, and she had been none the wiser. When she slid his ring on a plain platinum band she had chosen because he had once said casually that he found ostentatious jewelry exhausting. His hand tightened briefly around hers. "I now pronounce you," Reverend Matthews said, and his voice carried the full weight of the room, husband and wife. Ethan kissed her, and the 80 people who had stayed in that church, the ones who had chosen consciously or not to remain when the tide went out, stood up and made a sound that was not polite applause and was not restrained happiness, but was something raw and real, the sound of people who had witnessed something and been changed by it. Emily heard it. She felt it in her chest. She also heard in the moment after Ethan pulled back a different sound. A phone. Vibrating. Insistently. In the vicinity of the Harrison family. She turned. Thomas Harrison, Victoria's husband, had gone gray in the face. He was staring at his phone screen with the expression of a man who has just received news that the building he is standing in is structurally compromised. He looked up at his wife. He showed her the screen. Victoria's face did something Emily had never seen it do. It went blank, completely. Every layer of social performance stripped off at once, leaving something underneath that looked raw and frightened and old. "What is it?" Ethan asked. He was watching his parents the way a doctor watches a patient whose numbers have just shifted alert calibrated waiting for information. Thomas Harrison looked at his son. Then he looked at the king who was now standing from the front pew and who had Emily noticed already been in quiet conversation with one of his security detail for the last several minutes. "The Chicago Arts Foundation," Thomas said. His voice was flat, factual, the voice of a man reporting a diagnosis. "They've called an emergency board meeting. Victoria's position as chair is under review." Victoria made a sound. It was small. It came from somewhere deep. Emily had never heard Victoria Harrison make a sound like that before, involuntary and uncontrolled, the sound of something giving way under pressure. "Additionally," Thomas continued reading from the phone with the careful focus of a man using information as a life raft. "Meridian Capital has requested an emergency call, and the Lakeshore Club has—" He stopped. "What?" Victoria said. He looked up at her. "They've suspended our membership pending a review of conduct standards." The church, which had been vibrating with the warmth of the ceremony 30 seconds ago, had gone very cold, very fast. "That was quick." Joanna murmured to no one in particular, and immediately looked like she wished she hadn't said it aloud. Emily looked at her father. He was standing quietly in the front pew area, his hands clasped behind his back, and his expression was the expression of a man who has set something in motion and is watching it go. "Dad," Emily said. He looked at her. "What did you do?" "Nothing that wasn't already earned," he said simply. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He paused. "Your husband contacted me 18 months ago. He wrote to the palace directly. He explained the situation. Not to expose you, he made that very clear. He was explicit that he wanted no action taken that you had not consented to. He simply wanted me to know that you were safe, that you were happy, that you were his word extraordinary." The king paused on that word, let it sit. "He also told me in some detail about the way this family had treated you. He documented it, dates, incidents, specific language." His eyes moved to Victoria. He asked for nothing in return. He simply believed that a father deserved to know. Emily turned to look at Ethan. Ethan was watching her with the careful, open attention of a man who has been holding a confession for a long time and is now watching it land. 18 months, she said. "Yes," he said. "You contacted my father 18 months ago and told him how his mother had been treating me." "I told him you were safe first," Ethan said. "That was the first thing. Everything else was secondary." She stared at him. She felt the full architecture of it, the 3 years of knowing her secret, the 18 months of quiet correspondence with a palace, the never-breathed word to her, the letting her have her autonomy and her safety and her chosen life, while simultaneously making sure that somewhere in the world, someone who loved her knew where she was. "You could have told me," she said. "I know." "Why didn't you?" "Because you ran for a reason," he said. "Because the last time someone tried to control the shape of your life for you, you lost everything. Because I was never going to be the person who made that decision for you." He held her gaze. "But I was also never going to be the person who let you disappear completely. I'm sorry if that's a line I shouldn't have crossed. I would cross it again." Victoria Harrison's voice cut through the air, sharp and sudden and stripped of every social grace she had spent 60 years cultivating. "You did this," she said. She was looking at Ethan. "You brought this here. You went behind our backs to the royal family. You went and told them." "I told a father his daughter was alive," Ethan said. He did not raise his voice. "Yes, I did that, and I would do it again." "You've destroyed us," Victoria said. "Do you understand what you've done? The foundation, the club, Meridian Capital. Those are not just social connections. That is our entire—" "Mom." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Stop. You don't understand what you've—" "Mom." The second time it had a different quality, harder, final. "I need you to hear this. What is happening right now is not something I did to you. What is happening right now is the result of what you did this morning in this church to my wife, to a person who never did a single thing to harm you, to a woman who spent 2 years absorbing every piece of cruelty you aimed at her because she loved me, and she wanted to believe that people were capable of better." He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. "I stood there. For 2 years I stood there and told myself I could fix it, that you would come around, that underneath everything you were a better person than you were showing. I was wrong, and I will spend a long time being sorry for that. But this—" He gestured a short, controlled movement. "This is not my doing. This is yours." Victoria looked at her son. For the first time in 2 years of knowing her, Emily saw something in Victoria Harrison's face that she had never seen there before. She saw doubt. Not remorse, not yet, but the first fracture of it, the moment when certainty begins to crack from the inside. Thomas Harrison put his hand on his wife's arm, not to support her, to hold her still, to stop whatever she was about to say next. Claudia Harrison, who had been pressed against the wall near the side door for the last 20 minutes, spoke. She had not spoken once through any of it. She was 26 years old, and she worked at a design firm, and she had, in Emily's experience, always seemed profoundly uncomfortable at family gatherings, but had never once deviated from her mother's lead. Emily had always felt a vague sympathy for her that she'd never known what to do with. "I knew too," Claudia said. Her voice was unsteady. "I didn't know about the royal thing, but I knew I knew what she said to you at Thanksgiving. And at the benefit in March, I was in the next room. I heard it, and I didn't say anything, and She stopped. Her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry, Emily. That's not enough, but I'm saying it." The church absorbed this. Emily looked at Claudia for a long moment. "Thank you," Emily said, quietly, meaning it. Claudia nodded once and looked at the floor. King Alexander, who had observed all of this with the patience and attention of a man accustomed to watching rooms shift around him, moved for the first time in several minutes. He stepped forward slightly, and he looked at Victoria Harrison, and when he spoke, his voice was not the voice of a father, not the informal register he had used with Emily, not even the measured tone he had used to answer questions. It was something older and more formal and more absolute. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, "I have spent 4 years knowing that my daughter was in this city. I spent 4 years not coming to her, not because I didn't want to, but because she needed to find her way back on her own terms. She needed to know that her life, the life she built here, was real, was hers, was not contingent on who her family was." He paused. "She built something real. She is a remarkable woman. She was a remarkable woman at 19, and she is a more remarkable one now at 30, and not a particle of that has anything to do with her title or her bloodline or anything I gave her. It is entirely her own work." Victoria said nothing. "What you said to her today," the king continued, "and what I understand you have said to her on many occasions before today was not about her at all. You saw a woman without obvious power, and you used that absence to make yourself feel superior. That is a very ordinary kind of cruelty. It is no less damaging for being ordinary." He stopped. "Let that land. My daughter chose not to defend herself with the one thing that would have silenced you instantly. She chose not to use who she was as a weapon. She chose to let your opinion of her stand on its own because she believed rightly that her worth did not depend on your recognition of it. That took more strength than anything else that has happened in this room today." Victoria's composure had been dismantled piece by piece over the last hour. What was left of it was very thin. "I would like to apologize," she said. The words came out careful and arid, like something retrieved from a great distance. To Emily, and to your Majesty. For what I said this morning, which I recognize was—" "Mrs. Harrison?" Emily said. Victoria stopped. "Victoria." Emily looked at her directly. She had been looking at her sideways for 2 years. Looking at her sideways had been a survival mechanism. If you looked directly at Victoria, you saw the full force of her contempt, and it was easier to absorb it in pieces. But there was nothing left to absorb carefully. Everything was already out in the open. "An apology to my father doesn't reach me," Emily said. "An apology because you're losing club memberships and board positions doesn't reach me." She paused. "If at some point you want to apologize because you understand why what you did was wrong, I will hear it. I will genuinely hear it. But I am not going to stand at my own wedding and perform forgiveness I don't feel yet, because that would be one more performance in a long line of them, and I'm done performing." Victoria Harrison opened her mouth, then she closed it. It was the most honest silence Emily had ever gotten from her. Ethan took Emily's hand. The gesture was small, unannounced. He just reached over and took her hand the way he had been taking her hand for 2 years across dinner tables, and in hospital waiting rooms, and at farmers' markets on Saturday mornings, and held it in the specific way he always held it, thumb pressed lightly against her knuckle fingers, easy, not gripping. She felt herself exhale. From the back of the church came the sound of someone beginning to clap, not applause clapping, the sound of one person, then another, then a third, putting their hands together, because there was nothing else to do with the feeling that had been building in that room for the last 90 minutes. It spread. It filled the church. And Victoria Harrison stood in the middle of it and understood, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, what it felt like to be in a room where the warmth was not directed at her. King Alexander stepped back to where Emily stood and looked at his daughter and his new son-in-law, and for a moment his face had nothing formal left in it at all. "I believe," he said in a voice meant only for the two of them, "that your mother would have loved him." Emily pressed her lips together hard. She had not thought about her mother once all morning. She thought about her now, the queen who had died when Emily was 11, who had smelled of gardenia and had read to Emily in French, even though Emily's French was terrible, who had said once in the unself-conscious way that truly wise people say true things, that the only currency worth anything in this life is how you make people feel about themselves. Yeah, Emily managed. She would have. Ethan looked between them. He did not ask. He simply tightened his hand around hers and waited because that was what he did. He waited. He stayed. Every ordinary Tuesday. The applause was still going. Outside through the heavy church doors, the sound of it had drifted far enough that two tourists on the street stopped walking and looked at each other in the way that people do when they have unexpectedly encountered something that reminds them of what the world is capable of. And inside Emily Carter Harrison, née Amelia Windsor, Princess of the United Kingdom, librarian of the South Michigan branch, reader of stories to children on Saturday mornings, woman who had run as far as she could run and been found by love anyway, stood at the altar of her own life and let herself be held by it. The applause died down, the way applause always does, gradually, unevenly, with a few people stopping before others until the last pair of hands fell quiet and the church settled back into something resembling stillness. But it was a different stillness than before. The air had changed. The room had changed. Even the light coming through the stained glass seemed to fall differently, or maybe that was just what happened to a place after something true had occurred inside it. Reverend Matthews closed his book with a soft, definitive sound and looked at the assembled gathering over the top of his reading glasses with the expression of a man who has just witnessed something he will be telling people about for the rest of his natural life. "There is a reception," he said carefully, "I believe at the Meridian Room on Wacker Drive." He paused. "I assume that is still—" "It's still happening," Ethan said immediately. He looked at Emily. "Unless you don't want to." Emily thought about the Meridian Room. She had been to the venue twice during the planning process, once with Ethan and once with Joanna, who had strong opinions about centerpieces. It was a beautiful space. Victoria Harrison had selected it. Victoria Harrison had also selected the florist, the caterer, the band, and the specific shade of white for the table linens, all of which she had presented to Emily as a series of fates accomplished under the guise of helpfulness. And Emily had accepted every single one, because choosing her battles had been for 2 years the primary organizational principle of her life. She had chosen very few battles. She was reconsidering that policy. "Yes," Emily said. "Let's go." Joanna appeared instantly at her shoulder, which was one of Joanna's most reliable qualities. "I'll handle the transportation," she said, already pulling out her phone. "The cars are the royal cars going to the reception. Is that something I need to coordinate? I don't know the protocol for that." "There is no protocol required," said the man in the dark suit, who had been so still for so long that several guests had apparently forgotten he was there based on the small, startled movements that occurred when he spoke. "We will follow the bride and groom." Joanna looked at him. "Right," she said. "Okay, yes, I'll handle the regular cars." She walked away rapidly, already talking into her phone. Emily watched her go, with a wave of affection so strong it was almost painful. Joanna had known her for 5 years. Joanna had shown up every single day for the hard days and the quiet days and the days when nothing was happening. She had never asked questions Emily didn't want to answer. She had simply been present consistently and without condition in the way that the best kind of people are. She thought about what Ethan had said during the vows. Every ordinary Tuesday. Joanna was a Tuesday person. Emily had been surrounded by Tuesday people her whole Chicago life and had not until this moment fully understood how deliberately she had chosen them, how much she had needed them. Ethan's hand found the small of her back. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "Almost," she said. She turned and looked for her father. He was standing near the front pew in quiet conversation with Thomas Harrison. Not warm conversation, the kind of conversation that is conducted at low volume and considerable gravity, the kind where both parties are very aware of the weight of what is being said, and neither one is pretending otherwise. Thomas Harrison's face was the face of a man who is making calculations in real time, moral calculations, practical ones. The kind that happen when the scaffolding of an entire social identity has just collapsed and you are standing in the rubble trying to figure out what was actually yours and what was borrowed. Emily watched her father speak. She had seen him in state context before, obviously. She had grown up watching him navigate rooms of powerful people with the particular skill of a man who understood that real authority rarely needed to announce itself. But watching him now in this church, in this ordinary American city, speaking to this particular man, she saw something she had not seen before, or had not been old enough to see. She saw that underneath the formal bearing and the measured voice, her father was angry. Genuinely, quietly, deeply angry. And he was choosing consciously, deliberately to express that anger through precision rather than volume. Because precision lasts longer and cuts deeper and does not give the other person the dignity of a scene. Thomas Harrison nodded several times. He looked at the floor once. He looked back up. When the conversation ended, Thomas put out his hand. Her father looked at it for one moment, just one, then shook it. Brief, unsmiling. Victoria was no longer in the church. Emily had not seen her leave. She had simply at some point in the last 10 minutes ceased to be present, which was either a retreat or a collapse or both. And Emily found that she did not have the energy to determine which. Her father walked back to her side. "What did you say to him?" Emily asked. "The truth," her father said. "I told him what his wife has cost his son, what she has cost you, and I told him that the question of whether his family recovers from today depends entirely on whether they choose to understand what they did wrong or merely to regret the consequences of it." He paused. "He is a more thoughtful man than his wife. I believe he already knew some of what I told him. He simply had not been willing to act on it." "Will he?" "I don't know," her father said. "That is not something I can control. It is not something I intend to try to control." He looked at her. "What I can tell you is that the board review at the foundation is real, and it will not be resolved quietly. And the Lakeshore Club has an established conduct standard that Victoria Harrison put into place herself 10 years ago, which makes the current situation rather precisely ironic." Emily stared at him. "She wrote the conduct standard. She chaired the committee," he said. "There are minutes." Something moved across Emily's face that was not quite a smile, and was not quite incredulity, but was somewhere in the complicated territory between them. "I didn't arrange any of that," her father said, reading her expression correctly. "I want to be clear. I made 2 phone calls this morning before I entered this church to let certain people know that I was in Chicago and what I had witnessed. What happened next happened because those institutions have standards and because what Victoria Harrison did this morning was witnessed by enough of their members to make inaction impossible." He paused. "I may have mentioned in passing that I found the conduct standards of both organizations admirable." "Dad?" "Yes, that's arranging it." He considered this. "I prefer to think of it as providing context." Emily laughed. It came out surprised and real, a short involuntary sound that she immediately tried to contain, and the effort of containing it made her laugh again, and then Ethan was looking at her with an expression of such complete and uncomplicated delight at the sound of it that she stopped trying to contain it and simply let it go. It had been, she realized, a very long time since she had laughed inside a church. The reception at the Meridian Room was not what anyone had planned, which was, Emily decided within the first 20 minutes of arriving, exactly what it needed to be. The guest list had contracted dramatically. Of the original 300 invitations, approximately 80 people had stayed at the church, and of those, somewhere around 60 made it to the reception. The Harrisons were not among them. The florists had still arranged their flowers. The caterers had still set their tables. The band was still set up in the corner and began playing within minutes of guests arriving. Because musicians are professionals, and professionals show up regardless of circumstances. The room felt different at 60 people than it would have at 300. More honest somehow, more like a gathering of people who actually wanted to be there. Emily sat at the head table with Ethan on one side and Joanna on the other and her father across from her, and for a long time nobody talked about any of it. They talked about the food, which was genuinely excellent. They talked about the band, which was playing standards Cole Porter and Gershwin, and one unexpected Nina Simone that made Joanna close her eyes for a moment in appreciation. Ethan's colleague Marcus, who had stayed at the church and come to the reception and had apparently decided that today was a day for honesty, leaned over from the adjacent table and said, "For what it's worth, I had Victoria Harrison pegged as a nightmare from the first time Ethan brought her to the hospital Christmas party. I'm sorry it took this long for the universe to catch up." Ethan looked at him. "You never said anything." "Neither did you," Marcus said. "We were both wrong." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, we were." It was the kind of exchange that happened at the periphery of the day's larger events, small and undramatic, but Emily heard it and filed it away as one of the true things. The true things had a particular texture. You could feel them when you touched them. Her father had been placed at his own quiet insistence at a regular table with other guests, rather than being given any separate or elevated treatment, which had caused the event coordinator a visible moment of conflict before Emily had backed him up. He sat between Marcus's wife, a pediatric nurse named Shireen, who had no idea how to talk to a king and dealt with this by treating him exactly like anyone else, and one of Emily's colleagues from the library. An older man named Gerald, who had been reading science fiction for 50 years and was deeply interested in whether the British royal family had any opinions about it. Emily could see from where she sat that her father was listening to Gerald with genuine attention and had already conceded that he had not in fact read Arthur C. Clarke and was accepting a reading list with the gravity appropriate to the receipt of important diplomatic documents. She felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. The first dance was supposed to be a formal choreographed affair. Victoria had suggested ballroom dancing lessons, which Ethan had vetoed, and Emily had not argued about, because it had not felt like a hill worth dying on at the time. What they had instead was two people who could dance reasonably well, just holding each other and moving to a song they both loved, and it was better than anything choreographed would have been. "Tell me something," Ethan said when they were 3 bars in and far enough from the nearest table to be private. "What do you want to know? What was it like growing up there?" She thought about it. She thought about how to compress something enormous into something that fit inside a dance. "Lonely sometimes," she said. "Not because people weren't around, because so many people were always around and almost none of them were there for you specifically. You were a function, a position, and you learned very young to separate the people who saw the position from the people who saw you." She paused. "My mother was the best at seeing me. When she died, I lost the person who was best at it. And then when Daniel died, I couldn't find myself in anyone else's eyes anymore." "Does that make sense?" "It makes complete sense," he said. "Chicago helped," she said. "Working at the library helped. The kids on Saturday morning, you can't be a function to a 5-year-old who wants to know why Charlotte dies at the end. They need you specifically. They need your actual face and your actual voice and your actual answer." She felt the truth of it move through her as she said it. "That's what brought me back. Not therapy, not time, not any one thing. Just being needed specifically, being seen as a person rather than a position." Ethan was quiet for the moment. "Daniel," he said carefully, "you don't have to." "I know," she said. "It's okay." She took a breath. He was kind. He was genuinely kind in the way that not everyone in that world was. He made me feel like the position was incidental, like I was the main thing and everything else was just context. She paused. "When he died, I didn't know who I was without him seeing me that way. So I went somewhere where nobody knew me at all, and I had to build it from scratch. Just me. No context." "And?" Ethan asked. "And I built something I'm proud of," she said, which is not something I ever expected to be able to say. He turned them slowly in the music. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Okay. What do you want to do, going forward? Now that it's out, now that your father is here and there will be coverage and people will know." He looked at her. "I will follow whatever you decide. I want you to know that. If you want to go back, I will come with you. If you want to stay here, I will stay. If you want to spend 6 months in each place, I will figure out how to make my schedule work, whatever you need." She looked at him. She thought about the library on South Michigan. She thought about Maya, who had cried at the end of Charlotte's Web. She thought about Tuesday nights at the Literacy Center, and the man named Roberto who had arrived 6 months ago, speaking almost no English, and last week had read 3 paragraphs of a newspaper article aloud without stopping, and looked up afterward with an expression of such pure disbelieving pride that Emily had felt it physically. She thought about London. She thought about the palace and the gardens and the specific quality of morning light over the Thames that she had not seen in 7 years. She thought about her father eating dinner alone at a state table designed for 40, which was something she had not thought about before today and could not stop thinking about now. "I want to stay in Chicago," she said. "This is my home. I built it and it's mine, and I'm not leaving it." She paused. "But I want to go back sometimes. I want to see him. I lost 7 years, and I don't want to lose more." She paused again longer. "And I think I might want to be not a princess, not in any official capacity, but I think I might want to use whatever doors that name opens to do something useful with them. The literacy program, the immigration center. There are funding conversations I've been losing for 3 years because the city doesn't prioritize them, and I've had nothing to put on the table." She looked at Ethan. "What if I had something to put on the table?" Ethan looked at her with an expression she had seen before, the one that appeared when she said something that confirmed for him a decision he had already made a long time ago. "I think," he said, that is the most you thing I have ever heard." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a yes?" "That's an I married the right person," he said. The song ended. From his table, King Alexander watched his daughter step back from her husband's arms and laugh at something he said, and he felt the particular quality of relief that belongs only to parents, the relief of a wound that has been years in the healing, finally showing clean tissue underneath. He had spent 4 years knowing she was alive and not knowing if she was whole, and now he knew she was whole, and it was the most important piece of information he had received in a decade, and he understood. Sitting at a round table in a reception hall in Chicago, between a pediatric nurse and a man who wanted to talk about Isaac Asimov, that the right decision had been to wait, that coming sooner would have taken something from her, that the woman who had walked down that aisle today was the woman she had built herself into, not the woman circumstance had made her, and that those were different things, and the difference mattered enormously. Gerald leaned over and said, "Have you read any Ursula Le Guin?" "I have not," the king said. "Then we have a great deal of ground to cover," Gerald said with the satisfaction of a man who has found his subject. The king smiled. At the bar, Ethan's colleague Marcus was telling the story of what had happened in the church to 3 people who had arrived late and missed it. And the story was already taking on the quality of something that would be told and retold until it achieved the status of legend in a particular social circle, growing slightly larger with each telling in the way that true stories always do when they are also good ones. Joanna was on the phone in the hallway outside the reception room, speaking in a rapid and urgent undertone that suggested she was managing some kind of incoming situation. Emily caught her eye through the glass door and raised an eyebrow. Joanna held up one finger 1 minute and turned slightly away, which meant it was significant. Joanna reappeared 4 minutes later. She sat down next to Emily and put her phone face down on the table and said, "Okay, so, Emily said, "there are cameras outside." Emily went still. "How many?" "Enough," Joanna said. "Someone at the church talked, or someone in one of the cars. Or honestly, it doesn't matter how it's happened. There are at least 4 news vans on Wacker Drive, and someone is live on social media, and there are already..." She paused. "There are already 300,000 views on a video someone took inside the church." Emily set down her fork. 300,000 views. Somewhere out there on a phone screen was footage of her father walking her down the aisle of a church in Chicago, or Victoria Harrison grabbing the microphone, or Ethan saying something true in a quiet voice that carried. Or all of it. Probably all of it. "Emily," Joanna said carefully. "It's not bad. The comment sections are, people are..." She stopped, turned her phone over, showed Emily the screen. Emily looked at it. She looked at the comments for about 15 seconds. She put the phone down. She looked at Ethan. "The world knows," she said. "Yes," he said. He was watching her with that same open attention, waiting. "Are you..." "I'm fine," he said immediately. "Emily, I'm fine. Are you..." She thought about it. The honest version of thinking about it, not the performed version. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think so. I think if it had come out any other way, I'd be terrified. But it came out in a church where 80 people had chosen to stay, and my father was there, and you were there." She paused. "And it came out in a way that is true. That's the part that matters. It's true. Nobody can make it into something it isn't because too many people saw exactly what it was." Ethan took her hand under the table. "You know what this means," he said. "I know. Your Saturday mornings at the library are going to get very complicated for a while." She exhaled a short laugh. "Yeah. The kids are going to lose their minds. Maya is going to have questions." "Many questions," he agreed. "Detailed questions. She's 7 and she reads at a 5th grade level, and she is going to have opinions about all of this." Emily thought about Maya, and she felt the thought land with warmth rather than weight. "Good," she said. "I've got answers." Outside on Wacker Drive, the cameras were waiting. The world was rearranging itself around a story it had not seen coming. 300,000 views were becoming 500,000 and would be 1 million before midnight, and more than that by morning. Inside, a band was playing Gershwin, and a king was being given a reading list, and a woman who had run as far as she could run was sitting at her own wedding reception, holding her husband's hand and discovering for the first time in 7 years that she was not afraid of being found. She had built something real in this city, something true. And the truth she was learning did not break when the light hit it. It held. The 1 million views came at 11:47 that night. Ethan saw it first. He was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, still in his dress shirt collar, open shoes off, scrolling through his phone with the careful attention of a man who has decided that knowing is better than not knowing. Emily was in the bathroom washing her face, doing the specific, ordinary end-of-day thing that felt surreal after the day they had just lived, and he looked at the counter on the video someone had posted from inside the church, and he said quietly, "Emily." She came to the doorway with a washcloth in her hand and her face half clean. 1 million, he said. She looked at the number on his screen. Then she looked at her own reflection in the bathroom mirror behind her, and she looked at the washcloth in her hand, and she said, "I'm going to finish washing my face." He looked up at her. "And then," she said, "I'm going to come sit next to you, and we're going to figure out what comes next, together. But I need to finish washing my face first, because today was a very long day, and I refuse to go to sleep with mascara on my wedding night." He smiled. It was the realest smile she had seen from him all day. Not the careful smile he'd held in place through the ceremony, not the tight smile during the confrontation with his mother, but the smile he had when she said something that was exactly herself. "Okay," he said. She finished washing her face. She came and sat beside him on the bed, and they looked at his phone together for an hour, not speaking much, reading the shape of what was happening in the world outside that hotel room. The video had jumped from 1 million to 1,000,004 in the time it took her to dry her face. There were articles. Not tabloid pieces, or not only tabloid pieces, but real reporting, the kind with bylines from people who checked their facts, the kind that included the phrase, "estranged princess," and 7 years, and Chicago Public Library, in the same sentence with a seriousness that surprised her. The comments were what stopped her. Not the celebrity ones, though, there were those. Not the political ones, though, there were those too. The ones that stopped her were from ordinary people, from women who wrote in the clipped lowercase shorthand of someone typing fast because they were feeling something and needed to put it somewhere. Things like this: "Is the first time I've cried today, and it's midnight and I needed this." And "My mother-in-law has been doing this to me for 4 years, and I've never seen anyone say what she said to Victoria and mean it like that." And she stayed. She stayed, and she didn't perform forgiveness, and she didn't pretend. That's what I needed to see. Emily read that last one 3 times. She put the phone down. "I think," she said slowly, "that this is bigger than I thought." "Yes," Ethan said. "Not the princess thing, not the Harrison thing. I mean the reason people are responding to it." She paused. "It's not the story they think it is. They think it's a fairy tale. Girl turns out to be Prince's evil mother, gets her comeuppance. Happy ending." She shook her head. "That's not what happened today." "What happened today?" Ethan asked, genuinely asking. She thought about it for a moment. A woman didn't pretend, she said, in public, in front of cameras. She didn't perform gratitude when she didn't feel it, didn't perform forgiveness when it wasn't real. Yet didn't let someone reframe her humiliation as a triumph just because the circumstances changed. She just said what was true and let it be true. She looked at her hands. I think people are starving for that. I think that's the thing they're actually responding to. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. So what do you do with that? He asked. She looked at him. She thought about the literacy center on Tuesday nights. She thought about Roberto reading 3 paragraphs without stopping. She thought about Maya and Charlotte's Web. She thought about what she had said to Ethan on the dance floor, about using whatever doors her name could open to do something useful with them. She thought about 300,000 comments from people who needed to see someone stand still and be true. I don't know yet, she said, but I know it's something. He nodded. Get some sleep, he said. Figure it out tomorrow. She lay down. He turned off the light. Outside, through the hotel window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does at midnight in November, moving, sighing, refusing to be fully quiet. She lay in the dark and listened to it, this city she had come to 7 years ago with one suitcase and a grief so large she had not known how to be in a body with it. This city that had given her Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings, and a friend who carried tissues inside her dress, and an ordinary life so precisely what she had needed that she had spent years not quite believing she deserved it. She had deserved it. She fell asleep knowing that which was not nothing. The next 72 hours happened at a speed that felt inconsistent with normal time. By the following morning, the story had traveled past American media and into British outlets, which meant it had reached the specific ravenous attention of people who followed the royal family, the way some people follow sports teams, with intense personal investment and a vast accumulated knowledge of every player's history. These readers knew who Princess Amelia Windsor was. They remembered her disappearance 7 years ago. They remembered the palace's careful statement about her need for privacy, which had been accepted publicly and dissected privately for years. They remembered Daniel Ashworth, who had been beloved by the British press, and whose death had been covered with the particular gentle devastation that public grief is given when the person being grieved is young and good and the loss seems cosmically unfair. They had been waiting for Amelia Windsor for 7 years. What they got was Emily Carter Harrison, and the distinction mattered in ways that took several days to fully land. Joanna called at 7:45 in the morning before Emily had finished her first cup of coffee, which was the kind of thing Joanna did so consistently that Emily had stopped being surprised by it. The palace has released a statement, Joanna said without preamble. What does it say? It confirms the marriage. It uses your name, both of them. It says... Joanna's voice shifted slightly the way it did when she was reading directly, that Princess Amelia Windsor Harrison has the full love and support of the royal family, and that her choice to live privately in the United States for the past 7 years reflects the same courage and independence that has always characterized her, and that the family respects and celebrates the life she has built there. Emily was quiet. Emily, that's... She stopped. He wrote that himself. My father wrote that last part. Nobody in the palace communications office would use the word built. They'd use established or developed. He wrote it. Joanna said nothing for a moment. Then, are you okay? I'm going to call him, Emily said. She called him. He answered on the second ring, which for a king was logistically remarkable and for a father was entirely expected. You wrote the statement yourself, she said. Good morning, Amelia. Emily, she said automatically and then stopped because for the first time that correction felt less like self-protection and more like habit, and she was not entirely sure what to do with that. Good morning, Emily, her father said. His voice had the particular quality it had in private, the layer of formality stripped back to something warmer, underneath something that sounded like the man who had read to her in the palace library when she was 4. You used the word built, she said. I did. Why? A brief pause. Because established was inadequate, he said, and because you built something, deliberately, with your hands and your time and your stubborn insistence on being ordinary when you were anything but. That deserved the right word. She pressed her free hand flat against the hotel room desk, grounding herself. I want to come for Christmas, she said. Ethan and I. If the invitation is open. The pause that followed was the specific silence of a man exercising considerable self-control. The invitation, her father said, has been open for 7 years. She exhaled. I know, she said. I'm sorry it took me this long. Don't be, he said. You came back when you were ready. That was the right time. He paused. Your room is exactly as you left it. I want you to know that. I had them not touch it. Emily thought about her room in the palace. She thought about the bookshelves and the window that looked over the east garden and the slightly creaking floorboard near the door that she had used as a teenager to gauge whether anyone was coming. She thought about her mother's photograph on the bedside table, which she had left behind when she fled, because she could not bear to take it and could not bear to look at it and had spent 7 years not being able to look at it and now felt, suddenly and urgently, the need to see it again. Okay, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. Christmas. Christmas, her father confirmed. When she hung up, Ethan was watching her from across the room with a cup of coffee in each hand and an expression that asked every question without asking any of them. She took the cup he offered. Christmas in London, she said. He nodded immediately. I'll sort my schedule. It'll be formal. There will be protocol. People who tell you which fork to use at dinner. I know which fork to use at dinner. There will be a lot of forks. Emily. He looked at her steadily. I want to go. I want to meet your family, the whole family, the parts that come with names I have to look up, and the parts that will quiz me on my intentions, and the parts that will make it very formal and slightly intimidating, and all of it. He paused. I've wanted to since I first knew. I've just been waiting for you to be ready. She looked at her husband. She thought not for the first time about the particular quality of a person who waits. Not passive waiting, not the waiting of someone with nothing better to do. The active, chosen waiting of someone who understands that some things cannot be rushed and has decided that what is at the end of the wait is worth the patience. That was the kind of waiting Ethan did. She had not known until this week how rare it was. Okay, she said. Christmas. He raised his coffee cup. She raised hers. It was an absurd toast over paper hotel cups at 7:50 in the morning. But she laughed, and it was real. 3 days after the wedding, Victoria Harrison requested a meeting. She did not call Ethan. She called Emily directly on the number she had possessed for 2 years and used in that time only once to cancel a dinner reservation and once to ask Emily to relay a message to Ethan about a scheduling conflict. The call came through on a Wednesday afternoon while Emily was at the library. Back at work because she had a Tuesday literacy session to prepare for, and the world rearranging itself outside did not change the fact that Roberto was working on irregular past tense verbs and needed the materials by Thursday. Emily looked at the name on her phone screen for a long moment. Then she answered. Mrs. Harrison, she said. Emily. Victoria's voice was different, not the carrying, engineered voice of a woman performing authority, something smaller. I would like, if you're willing, I would like to speak with you, in person, alone, without Ethan. Emily was quiet. I understand, Victoria said into the silence. If you say no, I understand if that is your answer, and it remains your answer. I am not asking for a particular outcome. I am asking for the opportunity to say something to your face instead of through a lawyer or a press release or a second-hand apology delivered through my son. She paused. You told me at the wedding that if I ever wanted to apologize because I understood what I did wrong, you would hear it. I'm asking if that offer is still open. Emily looked at the literacy materials spread across her desk. She looked at Roberto's name, written at the top of the session plan in her own handwriting. She thought about what it cost to say the thing you had to say out loud to the person you had wronged without the cushion of intermediaries or the protection of managed communications. She knew what that cost. She had done it herself twice in the last 72 hours, and both times it had taken something from her and given her something else back, something cleaner. Yes, Emily said. The offer is still open. Thursday, noon. There's a coffee shop on South Michigan called Cornerstone. I'll be there. A pause. Thank you, Victoria said. She said it the way you say it when you mean it, small and direct and without performance. Emily said, I'll see you Thursday, and hung up. She did not tell Ethan that night. She told him the next morning before she left. His first reaction was visible on his face before he had any control over it. A quick, involuntary tightening the jaw, the eyes, the specific muscle that contracted when he was worried and trying not to be. Then he said, "Okay." She looked at him. "That's it. Okay. You know what you're doing," he said. "You've known what you were doing this entire time through all of it better than anyone else in any room. I'm not going to start second-guessing you now." He paused. "But I want you to call me after. Right after." "Right after," she said. "Promise me." "I promise." He kissed her. She left. Cornerstone Coffee on South Michigan was the place where Emily had her regular Tuesday morning coffee before the literacy session. The barista knew her order. The corner table near the window was usually available because it got the worst afternoon glare, and most people avoided it. But the morning light was good, and Emily had been claiming it for 3 years. She was there first. She ordered. She sat. Victoria Harrison arrived 4 minutes early, which Emily had not expected. She came in without an assistant, without a driver waiting visibly in a coat Emily had never seen before. Dark gray, understated, none of the architectural presence of her usual wardrobe. She looked smaller, not physically smaller, smaller in the way that people look when they are not performing. She sat across from Emily. She did not order anything immediately. She folded her hands on the table and she looked at Emily with the direct, unprotected eye contact of someone who has made a decision to be seen clearly and is not entirely comfortable with it but is doing it anyway. "I've been trying to rehearse this," Victoria said. "Every version I rehearsed sounded like a justification. I'm going to try to say it without justifying." Emily waited. "I built my entire life around the idea that belonging was earned," Victoria said. "That the right schools and the right families and the right addresses were not incidental details, they were evidence of character. I built my family around that idea. I raised my children inside it." She paused. "When Ethan brought you home, I saw someone who did not fit the pattern. And instead of asking whether the pattern was the problem, I decided you were the problem." She looked at her hands. "That is not an explanation. I know it doesn't explain why I said what I said in that church. There is no explanation for that. There is only the fact that I have spent 61 years sorting people into categories, and it made me someone who could do that to another person on her wedding day and feel justified." Her voice had thinned. "I did not feel justified for very long." Emily looked at her. She looked at the woman who had grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door, who had called her nothing, who had spent 2 years making her feel like an intrusion in her own relationship. She looked at her and waited to feel the thing she had expected to feel, the vindication, the satisfaction, the release that was supposed to come when the person who hurt you finally admitted it. She felt something else. She felt tired. Not angry tired, not bitter tired, just the ordinary tiredness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been offered the chance to set it down. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said. "Yes," Victoria said. "Did you ever actually see me not the librarian, not the girl without the right family, not the threat to your idea of what Ethan should have? Did you ever actually look at me and see a person?" Victoria was quiet for a long time. "No," she said finally. "Not until the wedding. Not until you stood there while I walked out and you didn't—" She stopped. "You didn't collapse. You didn't perform dignity. You were just present. Completely present in something terrible and completely yourself inside it. And I thought in the parking lot in the car, I thought I have been wrong about what strength looks like." Emily absorbed that. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me," Emily said. "I know," Victoria said. "I'm aware of how much that indicts me." Emily looked at the table between them, at the coffee cup, at her own hands. She thought about what forgiveness was actually for. Not the performed version, not the kind you offered to make a room more comfortable, not the kind that came with an audience. The real kind. The kind that was not for the other person at all, but for the weight you were carrying and whether you were willing to set it down. "I'm not ready to say I forgive you," Emily said. "I want to be honest about that. What you did has a long tail, and I'm still inside it, and I don't know yet what the far end looks like." She paused. but I'm also not interested in spending the rest of my life being defined by it. And I'm not interested in Ethan spending the rest of his life managing the space between us. She met Victoria's eyes. So what I'm offering is this not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. The door is open. What happens next depends on whether you walk through it or stand in the hallway. Victoria pressed her lips together. That is more than I deserve, she said. Probably, Emily said, but it's what I've got. Something passed across Victoria Harrison's face that was not quite relief and was not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. She nodded once the way people nod when they are accepting terms they know they have not earned. Thank you, she said, again with that directness, that smallness. Emily nodded back. She left first. She walked out of Cornerstone Coffee onto South Michigan Avenue, and she stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, and she called Ethan. He picked up before the first ring finished. "How are you?" he asked. She thought about it. The honest version. "Good," she said. "Actually good. Not performed good." She heard him exhale. "Come home," he said. "I made breakfast. The eggs are probably cold by now, but I made them. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She started walking. 3 weeks later, Emily Harrison stood in front of a room of city council members and 3 foundation directors, and 1 representative from the mayor's office with a folder of program data in her hands, and her name, her full name, both parts of it on the title card in front of her seat, and she made the case for expanded public funding for adult literacy programs in Chicago's South and West Sides. She had made this case before, twice. Both times she had lost. This time she had 2 things she had not had before. She had the data, which was the same data she had always had, the same numbers and outcomes and human stories that had always been true and always been ignored. And she had the name. Not because the name made the data better, the data was already good, but because the name opened doors that had been closed to her, and behind those doors were people with the ability to change things. And she had decided consciously, deliberately, eyes fully open, that refusing to use the name on principle, while children in her city couldn't read, was a luxury she could not justify. She spoke for 40 minutes. She did not perform. She did not leverage the title except to get into the room. Once she was in the room, she was simply herself, the woman who had shown up every Tuesday and Saturday for 7 years, who knew the names of every person in the program, who could tell you exactly what happened in a person's life when they learned to read a lease agreement or a prescription label or a report card. She was compelling not because of who she was. She was compelling because of what she knew. The vote was not unanimous. Real things rarely are, but it passed. She called Joanna from the hallway outside the council chamber, and Joanna made a sound on the other end of the phone that was loud enough to make 2 council staffers look up from their phones. "Tell me everything," Joanna said. "It passed," Emily said. "I know it passed. I want the details. I want the room temperature. I want to know who voted, which way, and what face they made when—" "Joanna, what—" "Thank you," Emily said, "for staying, in the church, for being the person who stayed." A pause, then Joanna's voice quieter. "Emily," she said, "there was never a version of that day where I left." Emily stood in the hallway of a Chicago City building on a Tuesday in December with her program folder under her arm and the vote counted, and Christmas 2 weeks away, and her husband's cold eggs waiting for her at home, and she felt the full weight of the life she had built, and she felt it hold. She had run from everything she was. She had built everything she needed. And standing there in the ordinary fluorescent hallway of an ordinary city building with no cameras and no audience and nothing ceremonial about the moment at all, Emily Carter Harrison understood the thing she had been moving toward for 7 years without knowing it had a name. She had not survived her life. She had chosen it, every single ordinary Tuesday, and that it turned out was everything.